Okay, well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. My name's Dave, and together with my wife Amy, who you may know from our support emails and our getting started videos, the two of us and another family, we own and operate Homeschool Tracker, and we're just so thankful for all of you for jumping on a webinar tonight. I know it's late on a Monday, and you've probably got plenty of other things you could be doing right now, but we're just so thankful and happy that you've joined us tonight. Just a few notes. We are recording this training session, and for everybody that has registered, you will get an email when the recording is posted, so that you can watch it again and take notes or reference any areas that you may have missed. Additionally, we will be sending out a survey at the end of the webinar as well with that recording link. Just want to get your feedback on that as well. So I just want to take a minute and again say thank you so much for joining us, and want to just spend just a second to talk a little bit about Homeschool Tracker and what our purpose is, what our mission is. And really that's to not only provide you with the tools to be successful in your homeschool, but also the training and the support so that you can use those tools effectively. And that's really what this webinar is all about. It's about showing you how to use those tools in Homeschool Trackers so that you can be more successful in your homeschool. So it's really our mission just to be there to support you guys. And so we really appreciate you coming out on the webinar tonight. I'm going to spend just a second to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover tonight. So this webinar is all about lesson planning. And if you've been on any of our recent Getting Started webinars, we probably touched a little bit on lesson planning, but it was more of a general overview of how Homeschool Tracker can work and all the different tools and things that are available to you. Tonight, we're going to talk specifically about lesson plans. And, that's obviously an area of the program that I think is very popular and there's a lot of questions about. So we wanted to spend a decent amount of time just really diving in deep and going over a lot of different things about lesson plans. So we'll talk broadly about what is a lesson plan. We'll take a look at a sample lesson plan so you can see how that looks like. And then we'll talk about creating lesson plans. We'll show you how to do that. We'll also import a shared plan from the shared lesson plan library. And then we'll work on scheduling our lesson plans and also talk about how to use presets to do that. And then we'll also talk about used and unused lesson plan items and how that works. And we'll also have a time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to submit questions as we go, and we will have time at the end of the webinar to answer some of your specific questions. I think we're slated for about an hour, just over an hour or so. And the presentation portion and the demo will probably take about an hour, and then we'll have some time after that for Q&A. If we don't get to all of the questions tonight, we will definitely follow up with any questions that you may have asked, and we'll email you directly with those answers. So let's get started talking about what is a lesson plan. So broadly speaking, a lesson plan is really a sequence of items that have not yet been scheduled as assignments. And so what that means, if we take a look at what assignments are in Homeschool Tracker. So assignments are really the heart of all of your record keeping. That's where the majority of all the data that you are putting into Homeschool Tracker is stored, and that's where all of those powerful reports and daily task lists and transcripts and report cards, all of those things can come out of assignments. And so when we talk about lesson plans exist up here, and so they're an area where you can create that sequence of items that are not yet assignments. Once they go through a scheduling process, those items then become assignments. So it's important to understand the distinction between lesson plans and lesson plan items and assignments, because assignments are really those schoolwork tasks that we give our students to complete, and they have a date attached to them, they have a student attached to them, and lesson plan items don't have either of those. And so the power behind lesson plans is that these are great if you want to plan everything out in detail all at once ahead of time. For example, you can build out your entire lesson plan for a course at the beginning of the year and not necessarily have to assign dates to it yet, or even students for that matter. Or this also works well if you have a predefined curriculum. For example, if you have purchased a off-the-shelf curriculum from a provider and they have a predefined lesson plan in that curriculum, using a lesson plan in Homeschool Tracker can really help speed things up there as well. The other nice thing is that because these lesson plans are not tied to a particular student, that means they can be reused over and over again throughout your homeschooling career. So, if you have, for example, a student taking freshman biology, you can create a lesson plan for that course, and then when your younger students are ready for that course, you can just reuse that lesson plan again, and you don't necessarily need to duplicate assignments or try to track those down the road. And then lastly, these lesson plans can be shared and imported in Homeschool Tracker using the shared lesson plan library. And that's really great if say, for example, you are using off-the-shelf curriculum. Our shared lesson plan library has hundreds of lesson plans that have been created by users just like you and have been shared. And a lot of them are based off of that off-the-shelf curriculum. Additionally, this is really helpful if you're part of a group or a co-op and say, for example, you're all taking a course together or you're all using similar or the same curriculum. A single user can essentially create all those lesson plans and share them with the entire group or the co-op. So I think it's a good time to show you what an example lesson plan looks like. So I'm going to jump over here to Homeschool Tracker. And I'm going to go over to the lesson plan screen, and that's located here in the menu under Schedules and Planning. And if it's the first time you're clicking on that, you'll likely be greeted with this little pop-up here that talks a little bit about what lesson plans are, a lot about what we just discussed. And you might right away notice that the lesson plan screen looks a lot like the agenda list view in Homeschool Tracker. Similar paradigm where you have an area here for data, and on the left here, these are different filters that you can use to display the data that you're looking for. So if I click here on lesson plan, this is a smart entry field, so I can just hit the space bar and it'll pull up all of my available lesson plans. Again, if this is your first time in here, you probably won't have anything. I already have a few lesson plans here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this Abeka Arithmetic First Grade plan. So we can take a look at what that looks like. And if you see here, this is the lesson plan. And probably the first thing that you might notice is that instead of a date, you have a day number. And if you remember what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, lesson plan items don't have a date associated with them, but rather they have a day number. So for example, on the first day of this lesson plan, this is what you will assign your student. So if I double click on that, this looks a lot like an assignment in Homeschool Tracker, except it doesn't have a date and it doesn't have a student, but it has all the other information, the subject in the course, the activity, the resource, the PLC, etc. So on day one, this is what would happen in that lesson plan. On day two, you would then do this lesson, and so on and so forth. And so if you take a look at how this is organized, this one in particular, they have 11 days of lessons. And then on day 12, they do an oral test. And on day 12 again, on the same day, I should say, they do another test. This is likely a written test. And you can see that these two tests are worth 100 points each. And it looks like the lessons aren't worth any points. But if we keep scrolling down, there's this whole sequence of items here. And if I go all the way to the bottom, you can see it goes for 171 days. So really the entire school year in this case. And that's a total of 202 items. So you can see how a lesson plan might be organized in this case. This arithmetic first grade lesson plan has enough items here for 171 days, and in total it's 202 separate items that, once they're scheduled, will become assignments for your student. So that kind of shows you, in general, what a lesson plan could look like. Let's talk a little bit about creating lesson plans. And I titled this Creating Lesson Plans 1.0 because there's a number of different ways to create lesson plans. And the first way I'll show you is just kind of a really simple way. And then we'll get into some more advanced techniques. So if I jump back over here to the lesson plan screen, let's go ahead and create a new lesson plan. So I'll just click on Add, and I can choose Add Single or Add Multiple. And Add Single is essentially creating a single lesson plan item, and Multiple is creating more than one lesson plan item at once. I'm going to start with Add Multiple. And I'm presented with this Add Multiple wizard here. And this looks a lot like if you've ever created multiple assignments at the same time in the agenda. It's very similar. So it defaults to the existing lesson plan that I was currently looking at in case I wanted to add more items to that one. In this case, I want to create a new one. So I'll just delete that, and we'll just create a sample lesson plan. And I can choose a subject course. And again, this is a smart entry field, so I can just hit the space bar. And in this case, I'll choose Ancient History 1. And I can choose a activity. These will be lessons. And a resource, I'll hit the space bar again. This will pull in all of my library items that are designated a resource. I'll just choose this one, even though that's a spelling resource, but we'll use that one for now. And then I can just click Continue to Day Numbers. And in this case, I'm going to want to start on day 1, and I'll increment by day 1. And so I'll continue to PLC. And PLC, for those of you that don't know, stands for Page Lesson Chapter. And so I could create all of these items with the same page lesson chapter, but really the power comes when if I start using these auto increment tools. So if I choose a 1-part auto increment, and I want to create lessons in this case, I'm going to start with lesson 1, and I'll end with lesson 10, and I'll increment by 1. So what it's going to do is as it goes and it creates those items, it's going to place text in the page lesson chapter field that says lesson 1. And then on the next item, it'll say lesson 2, then lesson 3, then lesson 4, etc. And if I click on this little sample button here, I can see a preview of what that might look like. And that's a 1-part auto increment. I could do a 2-part or even a 3-part. So for example, if I wanted to do a 2-part auto increment, and I could do lesson 1, section, let's say A, and let's say there's 2 sections per lesson in this case. So section A and then section B within each lesson. If I take a look at the sample for that, you can see the 2-part auto increment shows lesson 1, section A, then lesson 1, section B, etc. So let's go ahead and try that. We'll do the 2-part auto increment. I'll just change this to 5 lessons, and we'll hit continue to preview. So when I go to continue to preview, this is showing me a preview of all of the items it's about to create. They haven't been created yet. It's just showing me a preview so that I can determine if this is what I want or not. And if I look at it, I see that we were creating 10 days worth of lessons. And the PLC pattern is going lesson 1, section A, then lesson 1, section B, lesson 2, section A, lesson 2, section B, and so on. And now, since this is a preview, if I wanted to make any changes, I could simply just click on any of these tabs here at the top. I'm going to jump back to page lesson chapter because I want to fix something here. I'm going to add a space between this hyphen and then go back to continue to preview. There you go. That just changed the formatting a little bit. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for. So I can choose which items I want to accept. In this case, I'll click on select all and then choose accept selected items. And what that's going to do is it's essentially going to actually create these items within my lesson plan. So I'll go ahead and accept those items. I go back to the lesson plan screen and it's still showing the Abeka plan. So I need to pull up that sample plan that we just created and click OK. All right, so here we go. I've just created a new lesson plan, sample lesson plan, and I have 10 days worth of items, and the PLC is the pattern that we just created. And so if I wanted to, let's say, add a test after these 10 lessons, I could just simply go to add. In this case, I'll just do add single. Again, the subject course of ancient history and the activity, let's say it's a test. And we'll say that this is worth 100 points. And then I'll just click save. And so I just added a test. And you'll notice that it jumped to the top here because I forgot about the day number. So it's set for day 0. But I really want it at the end of this sequence. So I'll just double click and I'll change that to day 11 and click save. There we go. So now I have simple lesson plan here. I have 10 items, or excuse me, 10 days of lessons with this pattern. And then I have a test on day 11. So you can see how, I could certainly keep doing this sort of action. Let's say if I wanted to add more lessons after this test, I could essentially generate another 10 days worth of lessons, but have it start on day 12 instead of day 1, and keep doing that if I needed to. Or depending on your lesson plans, maybe it's only 11 days long. There's a lot of lesson plans out there that are, just a week at a time or a month at a time. really just depends on what it is you're looking at creating. But essentially, this is all there is to it in terms of creating a lesson plan. You can create single items at a time or multiple items at a time. And that's why I call this kind of creating lesson plans 1.0, because this is a really basic way, but certainly a very doable way of creating lesson plans. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about some more advanced techniques as well. So when we say creating lesson plans 2.0, we're talking about probably the way a lot of your lesson plans might look, or if, say, you're purchasing an off-the-shelf curriculum, they might be a little bit more involved than the simple sequence that we just looked at. So some techniques that I would suggest. First, I always like to sketch out the plan structure on paper first. And I say this because, once you start creating the items in Homeschool Tracker, you can certainly create many items at a time. But if you're just kind of going at it and just starting creating items, you might realize later down the line that, oh, I probably could have done this in a more efficient way, or I should have created these items before those items, or whatever it might be. So I always like to start with a paper version and annotate that and just kind of understand, how the lesson plan is structured. And then I determine which items might have auto increments in terms of those PLC. And I like to do several passes of creating those multiple items at once. So I might start with the tentpole items, I call them. And those might be quizzes or tests or like a midterm or a final. And I kind of set those up and set the day numbers for those. And then I'll fill in the gaps with the items that have the most copies in that order. So this all makes sense here. I'll just give you an example. And then at the end, I can essentially fill in all the additional details and then adjust day numbers if necessary. So let's take a look at this. This is from a textbook. I believe it's teaching textbooks for math. Let's see. Yeah, Math 5 teaching textbook. And this is just the table of contents from that book. And it might look similar to books that you might be using. And let's just take a look at how they've structured it. If you take a look at the table of contents, they have 7 lessons here, and then they have a quiz, and then another 7 lessons, and then a quiz, another 7 lessons and a quiz. And this pattern kind of keeps going for, all the way to 114 lessons and, a final quiz. They do 16 quizzes and 114 lessons. And it doesn't exactly look like it's 7 every time. So in this case, it looks like there's 6 lessons and then a quiz. And in this case, it looks like there's even more lessons and then a quiz. So, if I look at this on paper, I can start to see how the patterns might work and how I might go about basically duplicating this inside of Homeschool Tracker so that I can take advantage of the scheduling tools and be able to keep track of all these assignments once they are assigned. So what I like to do is then, if I have this already kind of written out, or if for example, if you have this from a book that you're using, I like to annotate it. And I'll just show you what that looks like here. So I did this obviously in the computer, but you might have printed out and just write on it with a pen in the margin here. But the way I wanted to set this up, I wanted lesson 1 here to start on day 1. And then I just wrote a 7 here to show that there's 7 lessons there. And then, I wanted this quiz 1 to happen on day 8 after those 7 lessons. And then quiz 2 on day 16 with 7 lessons in between, and so on and so forth. And so as I'm kind of annotating this, I'm seeing where these tentpole events, these quizzes, will happen on what particular day. And as I'm going, I noticed that when I got down here to this section of lessons, there's actually 10 lessons, and then there's a quiz, 15 on, and that lands on day 123. And then there's 6 lessons, and then the final quiz on day 130. So with all this information now, I have basically everything I need to create this more complex lesson plan in Homeschool Tracker in just a few steps. So let's take a look at what that might look like. I'll just scroll back here to the top. Let's jump back here to Homeschool Tracker and try to tackle this in a way that is the most efficient way possible. So let's just go ahead and start with add multiple. And we'll give this new lesson plan a name. So this was, sorry, I forgot the name, Math 5, that's right. Math 5 teaching textbook, let's call it that. And the subject course, let's see if I have, okay, I have a Math 5 already. Let's go ahead and use that. And the activity. So, as I mentioned before, I like to start with those tentpole events. So I'm going to start with the quizzes. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and create quizzes. And resource, I don't have this resource in my library right now, I don't think, but let's see, no. So if I just go ahead and actually type this in here, it'll create it as a resource in my library when I go to save it. And for the quizzes, I want these to be worth 100 points. So now I'm going to go ahead and continue to day numbers. Now, so day numbers start on 1 increment by 1. That's not what I want to do in this case, right? So if I look back at my notes here, the first quiz actually starts on day 8. And the next one is on day 16. And so it actually increments by 8 on a regular basis until it gets near the end. So what I'll do is I'll start on day 8 and I'll increment by 8. And then I'll continue to PLC. And for PLC, I'll do a 1-part auto increment. And I'll start with quiz 1 and I'll end with quiz 16 because there's 16 quizzes. If I do a little sample here, I can see a little preview of what that might look like. And then I'll go to continue to preview. Okay, so this is what we're looking at in the preview now. So I've got a quiz on day 8, then a quiz on day 16, then a quiz on 24. And this pattern continues all the way down here. Now I know these two are wrong, but I'll just adjust those after the fact. And if I look at the PLC, this increments all the way nicely to quiz 16, and they're all worth 100 points. So let's go ahead and select all of those and choose accept selected items. And then let's load that lesson plan up. Great. So here we go. I've got that lesson plan. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust these now. So if I look back here real quick, quiz 14 was on day 112. And that's correct here. And then quiz 15 should be on day 123 and 16 on 130. So I'll just change this to 123. And I'll change this to 130. This is where it's really nice to have it kind of planned out on paper first. Because you can imagine if I had created all 16 of these and then I had to change each day number individually. It's kind of nice to see where the patterns are, create things based off of those patterns, and then if you need to adjust 1 or 2 here or there, you certainly can. Okay, so now that I've got the quizzes created, these kind of tentpole events, I want to create all those lessons. So I'll do add multiple again. And this is where, when I said I like to take multiple passes, or I like to do this multiple times of creating these items, you'll see how this works here in just a second. So again, subject course, this is Math 5. And the activity this time will be a lesson. And we'll use that same resource, Math 5. And we'll make these worth 10 points. And now we'll continue to day numbers. So I'm going to start on day 1. And I'm going to increment by 1 because I want my first lesson to be on day 1, my second lesson to be on day 2, etc. Now the key here is I'm going to click this, which says skip over day numbers that are already in use. And so what that'll do is it'll basically create 7 lessons. And then when it gets to day 8, it's going to skip over that because day 8's already in use by a quiz. And then it'll continue starting on day 9, create the lessons there, and then it'll skip over the next quiz, and so on and so forth. So if I go ahead and click on continue to PLC and do a 1-part auto increment for lesson 1, and I'll end with, I think it was 114. Yep. End with 114 and increment by 1. Let's go ahead and continue to preview. Okay, so you get a preview here, and the items in purple are existing items, so it just kind of shows you where they fall. So you'll see that I have days 1 through 7, lessons 1 through 7, then a quiz on day 8, and then starting with day 9, lessons 8 through 14, quiz on day 16, lesson 15 on day 17, et cetera, et cetera. And so this keeps on going. And if I scroll all the way down, it should end on day 130 with quiz 16. And lesson 114 is on day 129. So you can see just relatively quickly, I was able to basically duplicate this existing lesson plan, or in this case, the table of contents of a book that I'm using. And I was able to recreate it, I should say, in Homeschool Tracker. So I'll just click select all. That'll select all of my new items, and I'll click accept selected items. So now it's going to add those 114 lessons to my new lesson plan, or my existing lesson plan, I should say. Okay, there we go. So now we have our 130 items, and here's our entire lesson plan for Math 5 and Teaching Textbook. Now, you could certainly, if we take a look back here at the lesson plan or the table of contents, the thing that we don't have, right, is this information: number patterns, the way numbers work, numbers and words, etc. And there's really no automated way, obviously, to duplicate or copy this information into Homeschool Tracker. So you certainly could go through each item, open it, and, for example, add this to the directions, or even append it to the PLC if you wanted. But in this case, I don't know if I really need it, because if I have this information, if I have lesson 1 and the day number and the resource and the course and all of that information, the points possible, and I think about how I'm going to be using Homeschool Tracker as a record-keeping tool in this case, and a planning tool, I don't necessarily need all of that additional information, right? Because I can essentially reference the book when I get there. So if I'm, for example, printing out a daily task list for my student or for myself, or if I'm just logging into Homeschool Tracker and I see, okay, we're on, day 11, I need to be looking at lesson 10, I'll just flip my book to lesson 10 and know now that we're doing rounding and estimating with 2-digit numbers. I see a lot of folks kind of get into this situation where they think they need to add every piece of information into Homeschool Tracker. And while certainly you can do that, there's nothing prohibiting you from doing that. It's really important to think about the end goal and like what you're working towards. So, if I really want to keep track of all this information so that I can generate a report card or generate a transcript at the end of high school or at the end of the year, for example, I really don't need to know that lesson 10 was rounding and estimating with 2-digit numbers necessarily. But what I do want to know is that we did lesson 10 and we had a grade of 80%. And from that grade, throughout the rest of the course, we were able to average out and figure out what the grade was. So certainly you can include this information, but I wouldn't say you necessarily have to unless you really want to. But all that to say that everything you put into Homeschool Tracker is certainly optional. And the more you put into it, just the more information that will be there at the end of the day. But I always like to kind of think of, well, what is actually necessary in my case, and is it worth it for me to go through and add 114 of these, or edit those 114 items to add this information? It's totally up to you, but definitely something to think about. Okay, so now that we have this lesson plan, let's jump back over here and see where we're at. So just to kind of recap on how we did that, we sketched out our plan structure on paper first. And in this case, we simply just used the table of contents of a book that we were using. But for example, if you were creating your own curriculum by combining lots of different resources, it's probably a good idea to just kind of sketch it out on paper, or using a different application, like even just a word processor or something, so that you can get a feel for how you want to organize this. And then I like to look again and determine which of those items have patterns or repeating patterns that we can use to create these in a repeating way to make it more efficient. So if you see that there's a quiz every 8 items, then that's a good pattern that you can take advantage of when you're creating these, so you don't have to create each item individually. And then really the key here is doing several passes of creating multiple items at once, and organizing that in such a way that you're doing it in an efficient way. So as you saw, we created those tentpole items first, quizzes, tests, that sort of thing. And then we filled in the gaps with the items that would have the most copies, in this case, the lessons. And so really we just did 2 passes, and we created 130 items, all kind of going sequentially through the entire lesson. And then, like I said, you can always fill in additional details if you need to. But again, think about that in terms of what you actually need or don't need. Okay, so that was our demo there. So let's talk a little bit about sharing lesson plans and importing lesson plans. So if I jump back over here to this plan, let's say we wanted to share this with the entire Homeschool Tracker community, or if you had a friend using Homeschool Tracker or someone in your group or co-op. The first thing I would do is just select all the items and choose Action Share. And you get this little pop-up here. And so it says total items to be shared 130. And so that's because I selected all of those items. If you only select one item and choose Action Share, you're only going to be sharing that one item. So it's important to make sure that you're selecting all of the items before you share. So doing Action Share. And then I'll need to give it a name for the shared lesson plan library and a description. And I would definitely recommend being as descriptive as possible. So, if you have an off-the-shelf curriculum that you create a lesson plan for, go ahead and put the name in there, the name of the book exactly, and then in the description, feel free to include any additional notes of what the lesson plan includes or doesn't include, or maybe how you modified it, whatever it is, anything that you think might help another user if they're going about importing it. And then once you're finished, you can just go ahead and hit Submit to Shared Plans, and it'll submit this to the Shared Lesson Plan library. I'm not going to do that one for this just now, just in case this isn't exactly what we wanted to share. But I'll show you how to import a plan. So if I go back to the menu and choose Shared Lesson Plans right here, it'll take me to the Shared Lesson Plan library. And you can search the library, or if I simply just put in a blank search and click Go, it'll show me everything that's in there. And so you can see there are hundreds of different lesson plans that have been created by other users and have been shared in here. So you can see, for example, this one has a great description, includes the reading list of resources that you'll want to include. But yeah, again, hundreds of different lesson plans here, a lot of them based off of popular off-the-shelf curriculum. But as you can see, it's definitely just a long list. So you might want to search if you're looking for something specific. In this case, I'm going to just search for math and find a math lesson plan that I want to import. I'm just going to choose this one, this A+ TutorSoft Math Grade 6. Let's take a look at that. Okay, great. So as you can see, this lesson plan looks really good. It looks like someone took a lot of time to create this, where you can see on day one, not only do you have just one assignment, there's actually two items on day one. And that's where this order field comes into play. So you can see both of these exist on day one, but the first item for day one is this lesson from the program. And then the second item for day one is the worksheet. And it looks like this continues on day 6, there's a test, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and import this one. I'm going to click on Prepare for Import. And it's going to take those 212 items, and it's going to kind of set them up so that I can import them into my Homeschool Tracker account. So it might just take a second here. Okay, and so now I need to give it a new name for my account. So I'll actually just call it the same thing, A+ TutorSoft Math 6. And let's take a close look here. This is a preview before we actually import it so we can see what it's doing. You'll notice that I happen to already have a Math 6 course created, so that's good. And I have both lesson and worksheet as activities. But what you'll notice here, there's an asterisk, and it says New under these resources. What that means is I don't have those resources in my library, in my account. So what it's going to do when it imports them, it's going to actually create those for me. And you would see that if I didn't have Math 6 as a course already, or a lesson as activity, that sort of thing. But that's just a good check, so you know where things are coming from if you're importing a lot of different plans. So I'll go ahead and select all of these and click on Accept Selected Items. And it's going to go ahead and import those 212 items into a new lesson plan called A+ TutorSoft Math 6 in my Homeschool Tracker account. So I'll just take a second here. Excellent. Great. So now you'll see I'm back here on my lesson plan screen. I'm looking at A+ TutorSoft Math 6, and I have the entire lesson plan here. 114 items, or excuse me, 114 days. It's 212 items. And this lesson plan is now ready to go. So that's how you would not only share a lesson plan if you created one that you want to share with others, but also how you would import a lesson plan from the shared lesson plan library. Okay, scheduling. So now that we have these lesson plans, how do we schedule them for our students and actually create assignments from them? Because if you remember when we were talking earlier, there's a difference between a lesson plan item and an assignment, right? And so our students can't really do anything with lesson plan items until we schedule them and create assignments from them. So we'll talk a little bit about what I like just to call simple scheduling, and then we'll go over some more advanced scheduling options. So simple scheduling, let's just take this this lesson plan here as an example. And let's say I wanted to schedule these first 5 days. So I could just go ahead and select the first 5 days. In this case, that's 10 items. I'll just go to Action, Scheduler. And I'm presented with the scheduler wizard here. And the nice thing is I can actually schedule this for more than one student at once. I'm just going to choose Campbell for now, and I'll continue to day and date. And I have a few options here. So I can skip days off, skip non-school days. And that's important. You know, if, for example, well, definitely, you know, non-school days means that you're skipping days that in your school profile, you choose what days you are having your homeschool. And so typically, let's say it's Monday through Friday. This means it'll skip over Saturday and Sunday. If you're doing a 4-day school week, Monday through Thursday, it'll skip over Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then days off, if you've created any vacation days or holidays or any kind of day off, it'll skip over those as well when it's scheduling. In this case, I'm going to choose daily. So I want these to happen every day. And I'll set a time for it as well. If I don't choose a time, it'll just simply create these as all-day assignments. But I'll just choose a time so that we have it. We'll say it starts at 10 and ends at 11. And we'll choose a start date of next Monday. So today is the 5th. So let's say we're scheduling this lesson plan for next week. So I'll choose the start date of Monday. And I will say continue until all selected items in the lesson plan are used. So if you remember, I just selected those first 5 days. So it should just schedule items for next week starting on Monday. So that's the nice thing about the preview here is I can get a preview of it before I go ahead and commit to that. And you'll see here I have Campbell, and day 1 corresponds now to Monday, October 12th, and we're meeting from 10 to 11, and the first item is this lesson 1. And she actually has 2 items that she has to do on day 1. And then you'll see day 5 corresponds to Friday now. So this is where you start to see the difference between a lesson plan item and an assignment. So now what we're looking at here, these will become assignments once we go ahead and accept these to the agenda, because if you remember before, a lesson plan item doesn't have a student and it doesn't have a date. What we're adding now is we're adding a student and we're adding a date. So I'll go ahead and select these and choose accept selected items. So it's going to take those and it's going to create those in the agenda. So now if I just jump over to the agenda calendar view, let's go to next week. You'll see that I'm viewing next week and I'm viewing all students. So you'll see that Campbell has 2 items from 10 to 11. So if you look at this one, it's lesson 1 for the A+ TutorSoft Math. And if I click on this one, it's worksheet 1 for that same course. If I jump over to Friday, this should be lesson 5 and worksheet 5. So there you go. That's really kind of the simple way to schedule. Nothing wrong with that. Certainly you could do that with any lesson plan. Or any lesson plan items and just schedule them 1 week, 2 weeks at a time, or even 1 day at a time. One thing I will say, I tend to just discourage users from scheduling their entire year all at once. And I do that because I think scheduling just 1 week or 2 weeks at a time just gives you more flexibility in terms of rescheduling if you need to. You can imagine if you've scheduled 6 or 7 lesson plans for the entire year, and you needed to shift things around, you'll be essentially rescheduling potentially thousands of items if you needed to push everything back a day. if you're only scheduling 1 week or 2 weeks at a time, it becomes much more manageable to reschedule if necessary. So that's why I always like to tell folks to just schedule 1 week or 2 weeks at a time. Okay, so that's simple scheduling, I like to call it, where you essentially go to the lesson plan screen, select the items you want to schedule, and run them through the scheduler. But I want to talk a little bit about some more advanced scheduling options. So if we jump to, under the Students section of the menu, Lesson Plans and Presets. Let's open that up. And this section of the site does take a little longer to load because essentially it's searching through all of your available lesson plans and pulling them in so that you can schedule them all at once. But that wasn't too bad. So you can see here I have these 6 lesson plans set as active lesson plans for Campbell in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new plan here to her active lesson plans. So I'll just click on Edit. And again, this section of the site does take a little longer to load. But let's go ahead and add that A+ TutorSoft math lesson plan to her active plans. And now I'm going to jump over to this button here that says Preset. Okay, so the preset here, if you look at it, it looks a lot like the agenda calendar view, except instead of individual assignments here on the calendar, what we're seeing are these are preset blocks of time that we've said we want specific courses to happen. So you'll notice here for Campbell, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., we have Ancient History 1. And then from 10 to 11, she has spelling, and then arithmetic 1, and grammar. And so we can kind of set up her week in terms of when we want these specific courses to happen. And what will happen is when we run the scheduler using these presets, it'll match up those lesson plan items based off of the subject course with the subject course that we have listed here in the presets. So we just added that A+ TutorSoft Math 6 to her active lesson plan. So let's create a preset for that course. So if I just click on Add, and for subject course, let's go ahead and find that one. It was Math 6, I believe. And let's say we're going to do it every day from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. We'll just choose Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and click Save. Now we've created a preset here for Math 6 every day from 2 to 3. So now if we jump over here to the scheduler, again, it's going to pull in all of those active lesson plans now so that we can schedule them all at once. So I can select which lesson plans I want to schedule. In this case, I'll just select all of them, and we'll choose Continue to Day and Date. Okay, so now here, again, you can skip days off and skip non-school days. But rather than do these daily, weekly, monthly options here, I'm going to click this button here that says Preset. And that will tell the scheduler to look at those preset times that we've set up on that presets page and match them up with the lesson plan items accordingly so that it will create assignments at those specific times on those specific days. And so I'll choose a start date. I'm going to choose the following week, the 19th, since we already kind of scheduled some items for this week. So let's say we'll start on the 19th. And I will continue until a specific end date. So I'm going to go through that Friday. So I'm just going to schedule 1 week. If I go to continue to preview, here we go. So you can see Ancient History 1, if you remember, that was Monday through Friday from 9 to 10. So she'll have 2 items on that Monday, and then 2 items for spelling. And here's that A+ TutorSoft Math happening from 2 to 3. You'll remember we created that preset. And if we go down here, again, you can see on Tuesday, she'll have 2 items for that course, a lesson and a worksheet. So here we go. We created essentially, well, we haven't created yet, we're just previewing it, but we're about to create 47 assignments from 6, I believe 6, maybe 7 different lesson plans for a number of different courses, all for Campbell all at once. So if I go ahead and hit Select All and choose Accept Selected Items, now we're essentially taking all of those lesson plan items and creating those assignments to her agenda. And you can start to see how this workflow could be really powerful, whereas you could essentially create lesson plans for each one of your courses, set them up here and create presets for each one of those. And maybe once a week or once every other week, go in and run this scheduler for the next week or the next 2 weeks to come. And you essentially have created your agenda for the next week or two, all at once. And it really can only take, it should only take a few minutes if you have it all set up this way. So if I jump over to the calendar view now, and we go to the following week, you'll see all of these assignments for Campbell are ready to go. Ancient history, spelling, grammar, arithmetic. Here's those math assignments. So Monday, I believe this was a test because that's that first test. And then she gets back into doing the lessons again on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. And so this is a really popular workflow that we recommend, where you do schedule an entire week at a time like this. And then, for example, at the end of each day or at the end of the week, you could go into the assignments as a teacher, mark them complete, give them grades, that sort of thing, and then kind of rerun the scheduler again for the following week. So that's how you would do some more advanced scheduling using presets and using the lesson plans and presets page, where you can schedule more than one lesson plan at a time. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this used and unused status. So what's happening when a lesson plan item is scheduled as an assignment is Homeschool Tracker essentially tells or keeps track of those specific lesson plan items, and it marks them as used for that student. And you can always change the used status if needed. So it marks them as used so that the next time you run the scheduler, it picks up from the one that you left off on. So let's take a look at, and this will make a little bit more sense once you see it. If I go, let's first go to the lesson plans and presets page so that you can see how many items are available versus how many have been used. So for example, here's that A+ TutorSoft Math lesson plan, and there's 212 items in that lesson plan, and there's 193 remaining, meaning we've used a number of them already. And it gives you the last date that they were used in terms of, the last date that we scheduled one would be on the 23rd of October. And you can see that for all these different lesson plans here, how many are total and how many are remaining. So if I jump to the lesson plan screen here, and we have the TutorSoft Math 6 lesson plan loaded up, I can click on displaying here in the filters and choose used by student. And I can choose Campbell. And let's say we want to see both statuses, the items that are both used and not used. That'll add a couple of columns here. And you can see if it's used, it says, yes, it was used. And it tells me what date it was used in terms of what date it's been assigned on the agenda. And it goes all the way through this item here, which is day 10. And so the next time we run the scheduler is going to look and say, okay, so for Campbell, if I'm running it for Campbell, these have all been used already, so I'm going to pick up here with day 11 and start scheduling from this one. Now, folks often run into trouble if, for example, you were to delete an assignment and you wanted to schedule it again. So let's say, for example, I realized, I messed some things up, or I moved some things around, and I deleted those assignments from Campbell's agenda, and I want to schedule them again. Well, if these still have used marked as yes, when you run the scheduler, it's going to skip over all those, and it's going to start here. So the solution for that is to reset the used status. So if you select the items that you want to reset, let's just say I want to reset these three days, I can just select them and just choose action, set used to status. And I'll do that for Campbell, and I'll say they're not used. And now if I scroll back over here, you can see that cleared the used status. So now if I run the scheduler, it'll actually start with this one here, because that's the next unused item. And the nice thing is too that this is set up on a student level, or it's student specific. So if I chose my other student here, Manning, you would see that none of his are marked as used because we've only been assigning them to Campbell. And that's really there so that I can schedule these for Campbell independently of Manning, and they can both be at varying states of the lesson plan. So that's the used and unused status, and it's definitely something to understand, because if you do ever need to schedule items again, you may need to reset that used status. Now, even if something is marked as used, you can schedule it again if you select it directly and choose Action Scheduler. But if you're doing it from, say, the lesson plan and preset page, you don't have that option. It's going to just pick up from where it left off. Okay, so let's see. So that is the used and unused status. All right, so we're doing great on time. It's 8:51, and we do have time for some Q&A. Just to recap real quick, so any questions that we don't have time to answer live tonight, we will answer via email over the next day or two. And then we will be sending an email to each of you with a link to the replay of this session, as well as that survey that I mentioned. So feel free to submit any questions that you might have. It looks like we have a couple here already. So let's see. Connie asks, now that the lesson plan is made, how do I add days off or vacation? Okay, so I can definitely show you where that is. If you go back to the agenda, either the calendar view or the list view, you can add days off and vacation simply by just choosing Add Day Off. And I recommend doing this usually as soon as you know, right, that you would have a day off. And when you're planning your homeschool year, it's a good practice maybe to set up these days off before you start scheduling anything. Because as you saw, when we schedule, you have the option to skip days off. And so if those days off are not on the agenda already, the scheduler is not going to know that they exist. So it's nice to have those days off on the calendar as early as you know that they're going to be off. So in this case, I'll choose what students I want the day off to apply to. I'll choose both. And let's say we're going to go on vacation, and I can set the date range for that vacation. So if you remember, we scheduled this week and this week. So let's say we're going to take off the week of the 26th. So I'll just set that up for the week of the 26th. And so you even have the ability to skip existing days off and non-school days in this wizard as well. But I'll go ahead and continue to preview. And you'll see I'm about to add these 5 days off for both Campbell and Manning, and they're designated as vacation. So I'll accept those. And so now if I look at the agenda and go to the following week, you'll see these all-day days off here, and they're for vacation. So if I now were to run that scheduler again, and if this week, or even if a single day existed in the date range that I was scheduling, the scheduler would skip over that day, assuming I had that box checked, and would just continue on after that. So hopefully that answers your question, Connie. Let's see. Kristen asks, can you select a date that is retroactive? Yes, you definitely can. So in the scheduler, let's just take a look here. I'll just select this, and if I just choose scheduler and continue to day and date, this start date can be any date in the past or the future. It really doesn't matter. So certainly you could create a start date that's retroactive. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so let's see. So Michelle asks, you say not to schedule for the entire year. If you do a couple of weeks, then do you just choose the next lessons from lesson plan and schedule them when you get there? Is that the benefit of having lesson plans on there? That's exactly it. Absolutely. And I think hopefully you saw how I did that where, and this is where the used status comes in handy as well. If you schedule just 1 week at a time or 2 weeks at a time, and then you realize, oh, my agenda is empty for next week, it's time to go back into my lesson plans and schedule the next week or two. You can, if you're scheduling them kind of the simple way or the manual way, you would just jump in here to your lesson plan, and let's say I'm doing Campbell's. I would just go and find where I left off and be like, okay, so this is my next start date, and I would select the next items I wanted to schedule and continue on from there. You can also, so I'm doing both in this case. both used and not used. I could just view the not used ones just to kind of clean things up a little. And now that the top of my list is the first unused item, and I could, select which ones I want to schedule and go from there. And that's if you're doing kind of the more manual scheduling. If you're doing from the lesson plans and presets scheduler, it'll automatically kind of pick up from the next unused day. Hopefully that answers your question, Michelle. Okay, so Connie asks, how does this work if we're using blocks rather than times? Blocks are rather confusing in the calendar view. So it works basically the same way. So blocks, if you don't know, you can set up your calendar in either time view, like we have here, or in blocks. And that's in the program options here. So if I go to program options into the agenda, I can organize by start and end times or blocks. And if I just switch over to that and go back to my calendar, you'll see that the times are now gone, and instead I just have these blocks here, 1 through 20 in this case. And if I go back here to my previous week, since these don't have blocks essentially assigned to them, or that, there's no, if I open one of these, you'll see what I'm talking about. They all have a block of 0 because we weren't using blocks until I just switched over. They're all going to be set up as all day assignments. So if you want to use blocks, totally your choice, obviously. In your lesson plans, you might want to then designate what block these assignments should exist in. And I believe that translates over to the presets as well. And I think that's probably more what you're asking. So let's just take a look here. I don't use blocks too often, so we'll learn together. If I go to presets, yeah, so that's what I thought. So in this case, my presets don't get translated to blocks in this case because I had specific times. So that's why they're all day. So I would just create presets for blocks. I could essentially add a new preset for a course, ancient history, and give it a block of 1, and kind of do the same sort of thing, but just using blocks instead of time. And then when the scheduler runs, it will match up my ancient history lesson plan with my preset here, and it'll put all of ancient history in block 1, all of math 6 in block 5, or whatever you had designated. So it does work in a similar fashion to time. I will say, and you'd mentioned that the blocks are confusing, and I think it might be, blocks is something that you kind of have to commit to, right? If you're not really like fully on board with the block idea, then it certainly could start to look like this, right? Where you have a bunch of these all day assignments, and then the blocks are kind of in this weird place down here. If you're going to do blocks, I would suggest you got to go all in to blocks, and really kind of that's your methodology, and that's how you're going to run your homeschool. And that's certainly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I can definitely see why folks want to do that, so that you're not necessarily tied to a specific time. But, if you're not sticking with that block methodology throughout all of your presets, and if you're creating single assignments and that sort of thing, then yeah, it could probably get a little confusing because you'll have a mix of items that are either in this all day item or this all day section as well as in the blocks. So hopefully that answers your question, Connie. And if for everybody that's asking questions, if this isn't helpful, if I'm not answering your question correctly, feel free to just email us at support@homeschooltracker.com, and we'll be more than happy to clarify or answer your question better if needed. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so Pamela is asking a question here. When making my lesson plans, I often have multiple items for the day and order them. When I schedule them, I notice that credit is given in multiple hours for that subject. Say I have 3 items for a day and my subject is set up for an hour each hour. It shows 3 hours was spent that day on the subject. Okay, I know exactly what's going on here, because I worked with somebody, or we worked with somebody this week who had a similar issue. And I think what's going on is if you go to your program options, Pamela, right here. And under, I'm going to switch back to start and end times just so I don't get confused. Oh, and because I have to. This time spent right here in the middle, oops, automatically calculate using start end times. If you have that enabled, then what it's going to do from a time spent perspective, it's going to calculate time spent using start and end times, even if you have multiple items occurring at the same time. So the program doesn't necessarily know that your student, worked on 3 items in 1 hour and spent, 20 minutes on each. It's going to assume that they spent an hour on each, right? And that's why if you're assigning multiple items to the same block of time, there's 3 in this case, it's going to then assume, or it's going to give you basically 3 hours worth of work completed in the time spent calculation. So what you can do is just uncheck this box, so that the program does not automatically calculate start and end times. And instead, what I would suggest is, if you go let's just go to the agenda. If you have multiple items happening during the same block, so let's see, these are 2 spelling items. So if I had that button checked and time spent was an important factor for me, it would basically give Campbell 2 hours worth of spelling during this time, because we have 2 assignments occurring, each for both an hour. So rather than do that, I could just come in here and basically specify time spent. So it's automatically it was automatically calculating this because of the start and end time. But if I did not have that checked when I created this, I can just come in here and put in a manual time spent. So in this case, 30 minutes for this item and 30 minutes for this item. And this is important, if time spent is an important factor for you. For example, if you live in a state where the number of hours that you spend on a specific subject or course is, highly regulated, and you need to make sure you have very accurate records, I would recommend doing this manual process where you are actually entering in the time spent, if and only if you're finding yourself having multiple assignments during the same block of time. Because if you are relying on the automatic calculation, then it's going to add up both of them in aggregate. So hopefully that helps, Pamela. I know it's it can be a little confusing, so feel free to email us if you have any additional questions on that. Okay. So I think, let's see here. Okay, so Connie's asking, if something comes up for days already scheduled, how would I move the assignments for those days to accommodate new days off? Okay, so essentially you're talking about rescheduling. So for example, let's say, just to kind of follow your question exactly, if something comes up for days already scheduled, would I move the assignments for those days to accommodate new days off? So I have this week scheduled here, and let's say something came up on Monday and we want to move all of these forward and basically take Monday off. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how rescheduling works. So from a very kind of basic level, the easiest way to reschedule is simply dragging and moving things around, right? You can even change the duration. But obviously that's not going to work in this case. That works if you're just moving 1 or 2 things. But if I needed to move all of these items, and if I remember, I think there's 40 some of them all at once, I need to use the rescheduling tool. And so if I go to the list view, the agenda list view, and I pull up that date range, let's see. Oops. Was that next week? Sorry, I'm getting my dates mixed up here. Let's take a look. That was the 19th through the 23rd. So let's pull up the 19th through the 23rd. Oh. So September, oh, excuse me, it's October. Hello. October 19th through, I have a really wide date range here set from a previous demo. Okay, so the 19th through the 23rd. So these are all of the assignments on the agenda for that week. And let's say we wanted to just move them all forward a day because relatives came in town on that Monday, and so we're going to take the day off. I could just select all of them and choose Action, Reschedule. And I basically just want to push all these forward one day. So um, instead of them starting on the 19th, I'll just have them start on the 20th, and I'll skip days off and non-school days, so it'll actually skip over the weekend. And I'll just continue to preview, and you'll see now that the existing date was Monday, and the new date is Tuesday. Existing date Tuesday, new date Wednesday. If I go down here, existing date Friday, new date Monday. And I can select all and just choose accept selected items. And let's just go back to the calendar view to see what that looks like. So now I have Monday wide open for when our relatives come into town. And now things pick back up on Tuesday. If I skip forward, oh yeah, I forgot about this. You'll actually notice that we have vacation scheduled that following week. So it didn't schedule anything there. It skipped over all those days off. And we should have a bunch of stuff now on Monday. So that's rescheduling in a nutshell. You also have situations where rather than pushing everything forward, let's say you just want to move one day's assignments forward and kind of double up work so that you don't fall behind. You would essentially do the same process, but you would just select the first day's worth of work and move it forward one day. But this brings up that topic too that we were talking about earlier, where if you scheduled your entire year in advance and you wanted to move everything forward a day, you certainly could. The program will definitely do it, but you would then be moving essentially thousands of items potentially forward a single day versus just moving 1 week or 2 weeks at a time. Okay, so let's see. So Cherry, I believe it's Cherry or Sherry, sorry, is asking, I never set times for my students. Is the preset option available for assignments that are all day? Yeah, I believe so. So let's see. I'm pretty sure, oh, actually, yeah, we saw that, right? When we switched back to the block format, all of those presets basically became all day. And I think, and we'll just confirm here in a second, if you just don't put in a start and end time, so if I just let's add a new preset for, let's just pick Math 5. If I just don't put a start and end time, let's say I want this to happen on Wednesday, I can create an all-day preset for Wednesday for Math 5. So that's how you would create presets that exist all day. Okay, let's see. So Mandy says, I have 2 lesson plans that do not show they are used. Therefore, I do not know the last assignment used. It should be showing that. If it's not, then maybe the use status was reset. But definitely, that's definitely a more of a specific situation. So Mandy, please email us at support@homeschooltracker.com, and we can take a look and see what might be going on. We can actually look at your account and see perhaps, I'll just show you guys this real quick. Sometimes, you might have filters here on the left or at the top that are turned on. And so you're not necessarily seeing everything in the way that you might expect to see them. So for example, right now, if I just glanced at this and wasn't really looking closely, I would see, oh, I'm viewing 199 and 212. What does that mean? Well, it means I have some kind of filter turned on. And so if I actually look over here, I can see that, I'm only viewing the unused items by Campbell. So let me just clear that. Basically, just view all. And now I can see, I'm viewing 212 of 212. So I can definitely see, all of the items. Or for example, if you might have like a search entered in here and, you don't realize that you're viewing applying a search to this data, you can clear that by clicking on that search there. I mean, those are just some basic things here in the list, in this kind of list paradigm of things to check. Also check, your students here, which ones you're looking at or not looking at, just to make sure you're viewing everything the way that you expect to be. In your case, Mandy, definitely email us and we'll take a look at yours. Okay, Pamela says, did my question get lost? I don't think so. There's lots of questions coming in, Pamela, so maybe we'll be getting to it shortly. Um, let's see. Jackie says, review for me, how do you insert a new lesson or quiz in the lesson plane? Lesson, maybe you mean lesson page. Okay, so Jackie's asking, how do you insert a new lesson or quiz in the in the lesson plan? Okay, yeah, not a problem. So let's see. This is a great question actually, because this will kind of test us a little bit. Let's say, for example, we're looking at this lesson plan for A+ TutorSoft Math, and let's say we want to add something to it, but not like something easy at the end. We want to add something like right in the middle. Let's see. There's 114 days. So let's say we're going to add a midterm at day 70 something here. Let's see. We'll do it after this one because it looks like there's a test. We'll do it on day 73. I want to add a midterm, and then basically I want to push all of these forward so that the midterm is kind of all by itself. So let's go to add single, and this is for math 6. And the activity in this case is a midterm. I have one of those already. And the points possible, let's say it's worth 100 points. And the day is going to be, what did I say, 73. Okay. All right, great. So now I have this midterm on day 73, but I don't want to also do this work on day 73 because that's going to be a lot. So if we go ahead and, whoops, and I'll have to remember how to do this exactly, but basically I want to select all of the items after day 73. So I'll start with that one. If I hold down Shift and then click down here, it's going to select that. So I have all these selected, whoops, after my midterm. There we go. And I want to renumber these. I want this to be 74, and I want it to kind of go from there. So let's go to Action and choose Change Day Number. Okay, so it says change all items. Oh, excuse me. Change. Yeah, okay. So I can either change all the items starting with a new day number. That's not what I want to do. Or I can change the 78 items that I selected on the previous page. That's what I want to do. So I'll continue to Options. And I have a bunch of different options here. So I can increase the day numbers by a certain amount. I can decrease them. I can reset them using a new pattern. Or I can make them fit over a range of days. In this case, I want to actually just increase them by 1 because if I obviously don't want to decrease them. And if I reset them using a new pattern, that could probably work too if I started with 74 and increment by 1. But let's just try this. Let's try increasing day numbers by 1. And again, the nice thing is you have this continue to preview, so it's just going to preview that for me. So the purple ones here are existing items that we're not impacting. So let's scroll down. Oops. And so you see I have day 73 is my midterm. And then starting here, day 73 is now day new, is now 74. And day 74 is now 75, and so on and so forth. So basically we inserted an item on day 73, and now we're pushing everything forward a single day. So very similar to what we just did in rescheduling, but we're doing that obviously within a lesson plan. So I can just select all, and it's going to select all the new items, and I'll choose Accept Selected Items. And so now when I go back to my lesson plan, if we scroll down, you can see I have this big midterm here on day 73 worth 100 points. And then after the midterm, we pick back up with 74 and go from there. And you'll notice, it didn't change the number of items on the day. So we still have 2 items happening on day 74, still 2 items on day 75, et cetera. We basically just increased all of them by 1. And you saw the different options there. So you have different, you have different options to how you want to affect those day numbers. So, kind of thinking through those different options like we did, I think is a good practice just to make sure that you're using the one that you want, and then verifying that in the preview too to make sure it is what you want. Because obviously if I did something that I didn't want to do and I committed to it and I saved it, now I have to go back and try to figure out what I did and essentially, run that again. But it might cause more of a headache at that point. So being really deliberate with the choices that you're making when you're doing kind of more advanced editing, I should say, with this sort of thing, I think makes a lot of sense. Again, too, this is also another reason why I think it's a great idea to start with those big tentpole events, right? Not to say that we couldn't do this, right, where we couldn't insert a midterm. Obviously, we just did. But if I were to be creating a lesson plan in this fashion, I create a whole bunch of lessons and worksheets, and then wanted to go back in and add a midterm or add 10 different tests at different intervals, you can start to see how that's not really the best way to create a lesson plan. Whereas if we start with those big tentpole events, the items that we're going to have the fewest of, create those first, and then create everything in between. You can see how that's a more efficient way to use the tools at hand. But certainly, you can do these sorts of things and push everything forward, and it'll work for you. So hopefully, Jackie, that answers your question. Okay. So Pamela is asking, when rescheduling, will the dates update in lesson plan, or does that not matter? Um, Trying to think. Oh, I see. Will the dates in the used status update? I believe that's what you're asking. That's a good question. I don't think it will. Actually, no. I know for a fact it will not, and it doesn't really matter, unless you're using that information for something specific that I don't necessarily know about. But um, and this is kind of an important thing to think about too. After you schedule a lesson plan item and it becomes an assignment, there's no longer any kind of link between the assignment and the lesson plan, and the lesson plan item. Uh, Assignments are completely independent of the lesson plan. And if we look back at this diagram here, assignments are their own thing, right? They exist here, and they can come from different places. They can be created individually or in a series, if you just create single assignments or multiple assignments, or they can come from a lesson plan. But because the lesson plan items go through the scheduler to become assignments, they're no longer tied back to that lesson plan in any way. So if you reschedule the assignments, you're not impacting the lesson plan. If you delete the assignments, you're not impacting the lesson plan. And so that's why we have the used status, so that if you do delete the assignments, that's how we're keeping track of where you left off in the lesson plan. So hopefully that makes sense. So no, if you reschedule these assignments, those dates in the lesson plan will not be updated, those used dates. But it really, I don't know if that would necessarily matter. It wouldn't matter to me, but if it does matter, for your homeschool, like I said, you can update those dates. You can update the used status, and you can even change the date, the date used if you needed to. So that's something you could certainly do. Okay, so Jackie asks, can you set the start end time for only one student? Not exactly sure what you mean by can you set the start end time for only one student? I'm assuming when you're scheduling, can you set the start end time for only one student? Uh, you could certainly schedule a lesson plan for one student and then schedule it again for another student. And in each of those scheduling tasks, the first time you can specify a time, a start and end time, and the second time you don't necessarily need to, and it'll create an all day assignment. Or if you're using presets, and if one student, for example, if Campbell had a preset that had to start and end time, and then Manning, my other student, had an all day preset, it would schedule those accordingly. So you certainly can, but you can't do it at once. So um, if I have these lesson plan items and I choose action scheduler, if I choose both students, I want to schedule these both, it's going to do them together, right? So if I specify a time, it's going to create those assignments for both Campbell and Manning at that time. I can't kind of diverge at this point. So if that's kind of how I'm scheduling, I would just do one pass with Campbell, set the start and end time for her, and then I would go back to Manning and do his again, and I wouldn't have a start and end time, and then it would create an all day assignment for him. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see here. Okay, so Kristen is asking, how do you add the grade that a student received on the quiz or test? Do you just go into the quiz day on the lesson plan or the agenda and add the percent? Okay, so yeah, this is a great question. So again, just to reference this again. So once the lesson plan items go through the schedule and become assignments, right? The assignments have things that lesson plan items don't. So assignments have a student and they have a date, right? And so all of your record keeping is happening in the assignments. Lesson plans are really just like a tool. You can almost think of them as like a template, right, for assignments that you can reuse over and over again for a particular course, for example. So your question is, where do you add grades essentially, right? So if we go back to the list view, for example, or I should say, let's go back to the calendar view. It's a little bit easier to see. And we go back to this week where Campbell has all of these assignments. Now, if you remember, these used to be lesson plan items. Once we scheduled them, now they're assignments. So we're not working with the lesson plan anymore in this regard. So let's say Tuesday, Campbell's here and she's doing history, spelling, all this stuff, and it's the end of the day. Everyone's in bed and you're staying up late to kind of do all your record keeping. I can go in here and click on the assignments and mark them complete, as a teacher. So if I click on this check mark for teacher complete, that one's now marked complete. In this case, these assignments did not have grades associated. Yeah, so there's no possible earned. So that was a bad example, but let's see. I got to find one that is worth some points. Okay, here's a good one. So this math 6 one, this is actually a test. So if I click on it and click mark complete, it's asking me, oh, it looks like this one needs a grade. So I can go ahead and grade this right now. So let's say she got 90 out of 100, hit continue. And so now that's marked complete and it has a grade of 90%. And you can see that a little bit closer. If I click on more, you can see the possible and earned. So points possible was 100. And, I gave her a grade of 90. And then I marked it complete. And so marking it complete is the key. When you mark it complete, it essentially records that assignment as complete. The grade is kept track of, and so on. So we cover this a lot more in the Getting Started webinar. So if you haven't attended one of those, I think we have one coming up in possibly next week. You can always go to Homeschool Tracker /training webinars to see our schedule of webinars. So the next Getting Started with Homeschool Tracker webinar is on the 12th. Again, it's a Monday night at 8 p.m. And we'll cover it there. Additionally, you can always just jump in here and watch any one of the previous replays for the Getting Started webinar, and we'll talk a lot about creating assignments. We do a kind of abbreviated lesson plan demo, but then we also talk a lot about grading assignments and marking those complete and what that means and how that affects your records. Okay, so Nikki's asking, what exactly does student complete mean? Good question. So student complete, is really just it's really just a way for you to know, for you and your student, essentially to show when your student believes that they've completed that assignment. And this can work in a couple different ways. So let's say, for example, let's say we're done with Tuesday. Now we're here on Wednesday. And Campbell logs in and she says, okay, I finished that one. I finished this one. I finished that one, but I didn't finish the other ones. Well, now me as a teacher, when I go in, I can filter based off of different things. So I can choose completion status and I can say, I only want to see the items that are student complete. Because for me as a teacher, those are the only ones that really apply to me right now, because I'm kind of in grading mode, for example. And I can see which ones are student complete, and I can just go and find those quickly and grade them and mark those complete. So student complete doesn't necessarily do anything in a record keeping sense. It's more of a way for your student to mark what they think is complete so that you can then filter based off of that. And then you can see what maybe as a teacher might need to address. So hopefully that makes sense. You don't have to use student complete. It's there as an option. And a lot of people do like to use it kind of in that similar fashion of what I just described, so that students can log in using a student account or even as in your account and mark things complete. and then you can filter based off of that and then know kind of what you need to work on as a teacher. Let's see. Michelle's asking, how can I make that an option to do student complete? So if you go to, sorry, I think I said that really fast. So I'm not sure if you guys can see the questions or not. So Michelle's asking, how can I make it an option for my student to mark complete? I just saw that you had it on yours. Is that in the options? Yes, it is in the options. So if you go to the menu and click on program options, under this tab here, optional fields, there's a number of optional fields that you can turn on or off. And I think by default, there's maybe 6 of these are turned on, and completed by student, I believe, is turned off by default. So you can always come in here, turn that on. And there's other fields here that you may or may not want to use. So you can just click that to turn that on and click save. And now when you look at an assignment, you will see that there is a student complete box and a teacher complete box. And that's how you can turn that on. Hopefully that answers your question, Michelle. Okay, great. So it's about 9:26. Thank you guys so much for staying on. Really appreciate it. I mean, I know it's a Monday night. It's getting late. I'm tired. You're tired, but we're all trying to learn this together. So I really, really appreciate you staying on, and hopefully this was helpful. Like I mentioned earlier, we will email all of you a recording of this. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to email us at support@homeschooltracker.com. Like I said, my wife, Amy, she's on the email all the time responding to questions. She loves answering your questions. She loves helping you guys through that. And also, we'll send a survey as well in that email. Just want to get your feedback on how helpful or not helpful this webinar was, and to solicit ideas for future webinars. So we've been doing a lot of those getting started webinars for newer users. And now that we're kind of past the back to school, rush, we're starting to look at, how can we help you guys explore some of these other topics like lesson planning, or, certainly we'll probably do something on report cards and transcripts, in the middle of the year and again at the end of the year. But yeah, just love to get your feedback. So we'll send you that survey as well, and we would love if you have a few minutes to fill that out. But other than that, thank you guys so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a great night. Thanks.